So my name is JND. This is my first video on this channel. The purpose of the channel is to engage in, I guess, cartoon type works relating to political events. More so political figures. I'm more into the biographies of significant American uh, individuals. So that includes most U.S. presidents, some senators. In particular, I'm really into Truman, LBJ, Carter, the older Bush, at least out of the modern ones. Now, if you go back to the earlier part of the American presidency, or rather the first couple, Quincy Adams hands down, and then Lincoln, maybe Polk in between that, but you get the idea. There are a number of figures that I wish to produce works relating to that have occupied the highest office in the land. There are some senators, for example, Daniel Inouye, uh, Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, Robert Taft. There's so many that I could just list the name off, but the general idea behind stuff on here will be that I will kind of try to give an update on what the scenario is. Now, presently, I am working on a script for a Theodore Roosevelt film, which is centered around the building and development and then finishing of the Panama Canal, which is one of the, I guess, high marks of his tenure in office as president. And I intend for that to the hoped for release date is in January to commemorate the centennial of his death, or to rather recognize it. Um, and I found it really strange that there are other projects I'd rather do, but just because that anniversary is coming up, I keep wanting to do something that is grand scale that says, "Hey, 100 years later, we haven't forgotten about you." And I guess that could, reflect upon my own thing of not wanting to be forgotten or ignored or otherwise overlooked. So, in having that ambition, um, I want to further it with these projects, these various works. But it's really an ambitious effort, and what's terrible about um, having so many people you want to do things about is that you're oftentimes not allowed to fully invest time in one in particular. A lot of people will say, "Oh, you should do one," and then you finish that and you go to the next one. But um, I have kind of a fatalistic view of life and mentality and all of that. Effectively, what that means is that when I start on a project, I'm more likely to just start pumping it out once it gets going, and that's because I know um, I'm on a time limit just like everybody else. A lot of people will tell you, so I'm 20 for example, a lot of people will tell you, "Oh, you have plenty of time, you can do this 10 years from now." And that's never been my thing, um, because I don't believe any of us have a guaranteed amount of time for any of this stuff. And in knowing that, I think it's benefited me in the sense that it's propelled me to want to seriously consider what I engage in and what I spend my time trying to do. And I think that when you attempt to become involved with political works and things that are of a substantive nature, you can uh, contribute to someone's learning. I intend for the Theodore Roosevelt film to be about a historical event that if people question the accuracies of in terms of the timeline of events that are depicted, they can go and look this stuff up themselves. I intend to make it very clear what the name of certain treaties are and different laws, and that's all designed for the purpose of showing my willingness to be as accurate as I can to historical events, because in an era where there is a takeover by television and films and just anything that moves, people are much less likely than they were 50 or 60 years ago to open a book and try to read on something. And I've accepted that as a current part of the era. Now that's something that doesn't afflict me, even though I'll admit I try to engage in both. But there are many people who, because something is not depicted in film, they're unlikely to know about. It also becomes kind of scary when you ask yourself, well, are people even going to watch the film if they weren't looking for the political event? And I realized that the answer to that is that's a possibility. But if this can reach and otherwise spur the interest of one person, I think it's worth the effort. Um, and I'll feel much more content having tried and failed than never attempting and feeling a sense of despondence in not getting that thing out. Just pushing it through. Um, and that's a characteristic I've had for a while. This thing of, it doesn't hurt to give effort. Now, obviously, those efforts must be accompanied by results to incentivize me to keep wanting to do things relating to it. But nonetheless, there is a willingness on my part to go out and try this stuff. But as far as I can tell, the things that I'm mainly kind of at the forefront of wanting to do project-wise, if I were to put in any order, it would be the Theodore Roosevelt film, something having to do with Truman, Carter, or Johnson. If I had to pick any presidents, that is, other than Roosevelt, and that's because of the centennial, which I still think is probably going to come out after the fact because, you write the script, then you have to draw all this stuff out. And before you even do that, you have to go and get these voice actors. It can take a long time to pump things out. But those four can expect their tales to be done before anybody else. Out of the senators, that's even more daring because I've thought about what exactly would which one would stand out as the most interesting story, and I keep going back to Jesse Helms because we're talking about someone who never ran for office before winning his seat in the Senate and was a magnet of controversy for 30 years. Whether you like him or not, that was an important historical figure, and certainly assisted Reagan in his presidential ambitions. His contributions to his 1976 campaign against Ford cannot be overlooked or diminished. And I think that when people are very likely to just sit back and think of historical figures that matter, we get so caught up in presidents that we don't attempt to go to the lower branches. Because if you actually had a timeline of events as they transpired, this bill that Reagan was known to have signed, a lot of times you'll go and look up and who's sponsoring it, who crafted that piece of legislation, that landmark achievement that you hail this president for, even though someone else wrote most of it. Just like with the Civil Rights Act, you had Johnson sign it, but Humphrey as its lead author or the person who wrote it, and he's overlooked completely. Easily one of the most impactful senators of all time, just tossed out the wayside because he lost to Nixon in a presidential campaign that had loads and loads of reasons for turning out the way it did. And also Nixon's another figure that really has an interesting career. His vice presidency with the, I believe it was the Hiss case. Obviously the presidency, there's just loads and loads of things that could be discussed and shown in these works that I think if people actually took the time to go and watch, because I have no problem sitting there and making it if I think people are going to check it out. Although I will admit that I think to really further the chances of someone trying to watch stuff about, let's say, a president from 80 years ago, you have to make one about, someone that's been recent, like Clinton or one of the Bushes or Obama or Trump, which again can inspire tales on its own. So there's loads of events and it's sad because a lot of times people, when you go to a theater, when they make a movie about a president or a senator, they take a whole 4 years and stick it in one film, and they miss all these events. Like for example, if I were going to do a movie about Carter, I can't even picture having it be just 2 hours. At least if I wanted to accurately depict important parts of his tenure without leaving anything that was, in my opinion, significant out. So for example, I'd rather there just be a full film about his handling of the Middle East. The Camp David Accords. Just that by itself, a full movie. And the same thing could be said with Reagan's victory. Just have a movie that chronicles Carter's last year in office with Reagan's uh, presidential campaign. Successful 1980 bid. Things like that, I think people would really get a kick out of, because you're watching two things at the same time take place. Uh, it's sad that I have to, because I like all of these different stories, but I'm only one person who has a limited amount of time to get things done. I keep sitting there and arguing back and forth with myself. Should I do this? Should I do that? And my greatest fear is the idea that none of this stuff is ever going to get finished or put out. So I do end up playing a game of, you know, what can I tell with this? What can be highlighted through this story? What can be pushed through with this tale? And that's something I'm not a fan of doing, but it's a thing I've gotten used to. Just constantly debating back in my head, should this be my main focus? Should that be my main focus? And I've ultimately decided I just make a list, narrow it down, and then pick between these ones. And really, I'd rather, one of the what goes into my decisions are two things: the likelihood that person's ever going to get a film made about them if I don't do it, or some kind of work made about their life, or at least a part of their career, versus how much I like the person. So I like Truman more than most presidents. Therefore, he has a higher chance of getting some kind of cartoon-based thing than most presidents. And I'm not saying that to say other ones suck, even though a number of them do. But I am saying that because I want to properly convey my ambitions. What my main goal is when it comes to these things. And in saying that, I want to be as transparent with what my interests are. A lot of times you say to yourself, don't outright reveal what all you want to do, but screw that. I want people to know what's the agenda, what all is your intent here. If you look at Thurman's career, that would be a really good highlight on segregation and just the civil rights movement. You could have that simultaneous with his first decade in the Senate. It's a really exciting tale. But again, it's something that I'd have to sit there and say, do I want that over a film about Carter? I'm not sure. Especially when a lot of times people read that name and they'll just say, "Oh, I don't want to watch that. It's about this person." I'm like, yeah, but it's about a figure that it's a film with other people that you do like. I could have a Thurman movie and there might be an appearance by a young Martin Luther King. Who knows? I mean, if it's during his 1948 bid, King is going to be 19, I guess, at Morehouse. I think that was the school he was going to. I'm pretty sure it was. I know he skipped 2 grades in high school, so he might not have been. But you get the point that it could be something the person might like. They just have to not judge a book by its the title would be accurate because it documents a particular the person it's named after's career while highlighting something else or having something else in there that might be foreshadowing of what is next to come. And really, it's sad that we live in this world where when people find themselves wanting to do something relating to figures and different people that have made impacts, oftentimes they feel this sense of, should I? Not sure. And then, a lot of it has to do with how will other people perceive this. And that's something that's, kind of worried me a lot of times. Well, do I really want people to say this? Do I really want people to think that? I said, I know my reasons for doing things. I think I can explain them. Even if the person doesn't agree with that, I can still give an explanation for picking X over Y. Uh, and which is why I would be more likely to do a film about, let's say, Reagan, um, than John Quincy Adams, who I like more, just on a personal level, because Quincy Adams was one of the earliest advocates against slavery in the 1840s. But nonetheless, that's the process that goes into this. So to kind of close this out, I want to repeat: the Roosevelt film is at the forefront. Um, I might begin work on the Truman film. I'd have to pick what it would be about, mind you, and I'm gonna pick one between one of those senators. I have a list. When I pick, I'm going to announce it during some subsequent stream. But Jesse Helms is really at the height of that because there's so much stuff that could be highlighted um, and spoken about just through having a film about him. You can really learn some stuff from what he was against. So thank you for watching, and I intend for this to be a weekly thing. I appreciate it.